is going to talk to us today. Now, Warren, on his profile, he says he loves WordPress, passionate about teaching solo entrepreneurs about how to leverage its power and simplicity to build websites. He also says he's a huge Beyonce fan. So we'll get started now.
Yeah, that might have been where the title come from, but I'm not dancing and I'm not singing, okay? I won't do that to you. All right, so HTTPS, everyone know what that is? Okay, we've got a good smattering of hands there, that's good. So does everyone know how to recognise when you're on a website whether it's served via HTTPS or whether it's served via HTTP? Yeah, just in case, it does vary across browsers and it does vary by certificate type. So in most browsers you just see a lock for most HTTPS normal certificates. And if you see something that's got the company name in it, that's what's called an extended validation certificate. And they've paid a lot of money to make sure that you know that that is them that you're dealing with. We'll get into that a little bit later in the talk anyway. So first of all, let's talk about why we would want HTTPS on our site. Why would we want to serve our site securely? So let's have a quick look at the benefits. First and foremost, it's to protect customer interactions with your site. So anytime they're providing information to your site or back and forward, those communications are encrypted. So anyone that might be sniffing across the network will not be able to tell, one, what you're saying, or two, where they're going within your site. So it's very useful for things like form submission. So for personally identifiable information, no one can sniff that. It's just a secure interaction between you and your browser. And definitely for payment information. In fact, for PCI compliance, it's a requirement that your site has to be served via HTTPS. I guess the next biggest reason is it builds trust. You know, any of us, we go to a site and we see that little green lock, we see the green name, we instantly trust that site more than if we come to any other site. It just, you know, if someone's gone to the effort of putting that on their site and verifying who they are and taking the time to set it up, then they're serious about their business, and therefore, whether we do it consciously or not, we have that level of trust with them straight from the get-go. The other big one is, as has been mentioned a couple of times today already, Google prefers HTTPS and is actively starting to rank those sites higher than if your site isn't using HTTPS. So if Google thinks it's a good thing, we should think it's a good thing. And believe it is actually faster. Now, there's been a lot of talk around this topic, and in the first instance people said, oh no, it's got to be slower because there's all this extra handshaking that goes on to establish that connection. The reason it's actually faster is because it forces the newer HTTP protocols, HTTP2, which I don't want to go into a lot of technical detail because it is after lunch and I don't want to bore you to tears, but basically what it does is instead of allowing only a few resources to be loaded on your site at once, it basically says, here they are, go for your life, load them all at once. So you get this parallel effect that actually gets all of your resources in the browser a lot quicker. And also, one of the other benefits is there's more accurate tracking data. And this is one that actually surprised me a little bit when I was doing the research for this, is we all know that if we go to our Google Analytics stats, we get a lot of data or a lot of traffic that apparently is direct traffic, and we really don't know where it's come from. And this is one where Google will actually give you some more information. So if you've come, or someone's come from a HTTPS site to your site and it's only HTTP, that'll go in the direct bucket. If they come from an HTTPS site to your HTTPS site, it will actually track where that's come from and it'll give you the breakdown of where that traffic came from. So it'll actually help you know where your traffic's coming from. So, why don't people use HTTPS if it's got all those benefits? Just a show of hands, whose site is actually served by HTTPS at the moment? All right, so we've got about 2/3. If those that aren't using it, just throw it at me. What are some of the reasons you're not using HTTPS at the moment? Don't know enough about it. That's a common one. Yep. Yep, disrupting SEO. Any other common ones up the back? Sorry? Thought I only needed it for e-commerce. Yes, well, as we've already seen, there's a lot of other benefits as well. So when I ask that question around, the three main categories of response I get are basically the lack of awareness. I don't know enough about it to know what's required, how I do it, whether I even need to do it. The next one, which no one here surprisingly threw out, was I get a lot of people saying, oh, but it's too expensive to implement. Well, I'm going to show you later in the presentation how we can get around that one. And the other one that's common is the complexity. At its core, there is a lot of technical stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and I am not going to cover that today, even though I could have a one-on-one conversation and tell you all about it. It's just not something you want to get into if you can avoid it. And I can definitely show you how we can get around the complexity problem. So let's have a look at what HTTPS is, and we've sort of already covered it. Basically, the short answer is it's a little block that appears in your browser if you're using Chrome or one of those other ones that we saw before. And basically means, yep, I'm telling you that we've got a secure communication channel between the browser and the site. The technical answer, and I'm not going to read that, but you can if you want, and you can get the slides later and read through it. But there is obviously a whole bunch behind that as well in terms of technical protocols and communication standards and encryption standards and all sorts of stuff. So there is some really technical stuff going on in the back end. But the practical answer is, you can think of it as sort of like a secret handshake between the browser and your server. So when someone comes to your site, your server sends back this little challenge, says, hey, do you know this secret handshake we've got? Oh, you do? Great. Well, then we can communicate in this secret language so no one else can listen to what we're saying. That's effectively what's going on. So what does it actually do for us? Well, at its core, it encrypts all the data that goes back and forward between the browser and your site, and we've covered that before. So basically, if anyone was to look at that data, they couldn't understand it anyway, so it stops all that password sniffing. So what I mean by that is, if you're not using HTTPS, everything that goes back and forward between the browser and your site is just strings of text. And if someone can get onto the network and look at those packets going through, they can actually decipher them and work out, what your site name is, and if someone's logging in, their username and password. Not your average user can do that, but if someone's serious, they can actually do that. HTTPS will stop that in its tracks. Another big benefit of it is it actually confirms the identity of your site. So to get an SSL certificate, which is the underlying core of HTTPS, you have to show the certificate authority that you are, or your site is, who you say it is. So when a browser or a user comes to your site from the browser, they basically look at the certificate, they go to the certificate authority and go, hey, is this person really who they say they are? And the certificate authority says, yep, we issued that certificate, we know that's them. So what this does, it stops what's called man-in-the-middle attacks. And again, this is some more advanced stuff, but people, if they can sniff the traffic, they can also insert dummy traffic. So basically, if someone's trying to access your site, they could hook onto that and ditch your traffic and send them some other traffic. The visitor thinks they're on your site, but they're not actually on your site. So again, this will stop that because they won't be able to confirm that they are the site they say they are. And as I mentioned before, it forces those newer HTTP protocols so the whole thing runs a lot quicker. Even though there's a lot more communication going on to start that secure channel, it does actually load quite a bit faster, and you can actually notice a difference. All right, so what won't HTTPS do? It's not the cure for all evils, and we need to be very clear about what it can't do for us. First and foremost, it will not protect email communications. It's got nothing to do with email. It's only about browser communication. All right, so there's other ways you can secure your email, but this is not it. It won't stop hackers for the majority of the the paths they use in. As I said, it'll stop the browser sniffing, it'll stop that password sniffing stuff, but it won't stop any of the other vectors that hackers currently use to try and get access to WordPress sites. So by doing this, you're not fully protecting your site. You will still need additional security software on top of that. So yeah, don't be lulled into a false sense of security there. And the other thing it won't do is it will not protect information once it is stored on your site. So if you're collecting customer information and you're putting it into your WordPress database, once it's in that database, if you are hacked, hackers will be able to get to that. It's not encrypting the database in any way, shape or form. It's only encrypting that traffic in transit. Okay? So as long as we're clear about what it does and what it doesn't do, then we're good to go. Just a little quote here. Basically, security for all that mattered. Computers would never be turned on, let alone hooked into a network with literally millions of potential intruders. And the reason I put this in here is we just need to balance. It's the same with all the stuff we do on our sites. There's extremes on both ends. You can do nothing, or you can, try and lock your site down to the nth degree. Neither one's going to get us far. What we've got to do is just land on a place in the middle there where we take care of the major vulnerabilities and then just accept that there's some things we can't do much about and have other strategies in place for how we would deal with them if they did happen. So SSL's sort of out on that end of, let's lock it down, let's protect it as best we can, but we do know that it's not the be-all and end-all. All right, so how do we make this happen on our sites then? This is where we get into the whole, it's too complex thing. So let me go through it, we'll have a look at it, and by the end of it, hopefully we can say, yeah, I can do that. All right, so the basic steps, first of all, we have to give ourselves a certificate. All right, so that's the core underlying structure that will make all this happen. Once we've got that, we've got to get it installed onto our web hosting server. Once that's all in place, then we can update our WordPress settings to use HTTPS, and then we update all our content and links to make sure that they're also serving over that protocol. And once all that's in place and we're pretty happy, then we can force all the traffic that comes to our site to use HTTPS. And finally, we'll resolve any issues. So I will go through these in some detail at the moment, but I'm not going to dive into all the technical detail. Those first two steps there can get very complicated if you wanted to go down the old path, the way that it originally was done, but I'm going to show you a way where we can do it in just 2 clicks. All right, so before we get into where we get our certificates, let's look at the types of certificates there are. So there's actually quite a range of them. The normal one is just a single domain certificate. So this is where you go and you say, xyz.com, I want a certificate that's going to give me HTTPS on that site. It will not protect any other site, it's just purely for that site. It won't protect any other subdomains you may have on that site either. Okay? It's the simplest, it's the cheapest, and it just does the one site. If you have a few domains that you want to protect, you can either do them as individual single domain certificates, or you can get a multi-domain certificate sometimes as well, where they're unrelated domains, but you just say, I want to do xyz.com and abc.com and, I don't know, 123.com on this one certificate, and you can get that certificate that will actually secure all 3 of those sites. Still has to be installed on the server for each of those. So if you've got different servers, you probably want different certificates, single domain. If you've got the one server serving all 3 of those, that's where this one would come in. You can get a wildcard certificate, and this is the one where if you've got abc.com and you've got store.abc.com, then this is the one you want. So it basically protects your main site and any subdomains you have on that site as well. And then finally, there's the extended validation one, which is the one we saw like Apple has, Amazon has, all those big ones where they actually have the company name in the browser bar as well. And this one goes beyond just the technical certificate level. There's a whole bunch of physical auditing and stuff that goes on where the issuing authority actually goes in and checks the company records to make sure they really are who they are. So it's a lot more expensive and it's a lot more involved, and it's really for those top tier companies who want to make absolutely sure that the visitors have total confidence in their site. All right, so where to buy them? There are certificate authorities, and in the past, it used to make a big difference who you went with. There were some big names and there were some not so big names. And when SSL first come out, it really was a status thing to say, I had a Komodo certificate or I had a XYZ certificate. These days, not such a big issue, but they are the two top providers at the moment. Then you have a whole bunch of retailers who pick up certificates from these sites and sell them on to end clients. And one of the biggest in this space is GoDaddy. And they're not just protecting sites on their servers. GoDaddy is a big reseller to other servers as well. But probably if you're going to go down the path of getting your own certificate, the easiest way is to get your host to do it. Most good hosts will have a SSL certificate that they'll sell you, and the benefit of this is that they will actually install it for you as well and take away a lot of that technical stuff. All right, so to install it on your server, there is a couple of paths. You could do it yourself. All right, but this requires a lot of technical steps. There's keys to generate, there's files to drop in certain locations. You really need to know what you're doing, and you really need to be comfortable with command line tools on your host. And you will need server level access to do that as well. Not recommended for most people. Even though I'm quite technical, I would not do that myself. You could go down the host path. Most hosts will do it for you, make it nice and easy for you. It's a much better option for most people. However, there is an even easier option on the market now, and it's called Let's Encrypt. I think Kath touched on this briefly in her previous presentation, but Let's Encrypt is basically an industry collaboration that's trying to spread the use of SSL. In fact, they're trying to get it ubiquitous. What they're doing is they're offering free certificates, free to anyone. So you can go there and you can pick it up yourself. They do have a path where you can install it yourself, but they're really trying to get away from that, because what they're doing is they're setting up automated interfaces. And what they're trying to do is get all of the big hosts on board, and so far they've got a lot of them on board, to use these automated interfaces such that as an end user dealing with your host, all you have to do is click a button and that this will all happen in the background. Okay? So the downside of Let's Encrypt when it first came out is they're only valid for 90 days. So every 90 days you would have to go and renew it. And we all thought that was a bit of a pain, but it turns out this is what they're trying to achieve. They're trying to force people away from doing it themselves and get the hosts on board so that the hosts would then just automatically renew. And by pushing people down that path, it makes it so much easier for end users to get on it, and it gets them closer to their goal of getting everyone onto HTTPS. And the big thing is that they're being open and transparent about all the certificates issued, so there's no hiding. So, we talked before about why we didn't do it. We said one of those things was that there wasn't an awareness, so we've covered that. We've talked about the cost being an issue. Let's Encrypt is free, so that's not an issue. Now let's cover off the complexity and let's see just how easy it is to install with Let's Encrypt. So if your host supports it, and this is from the SiteGround control panel, which we use, but a lot of other hosts also have pretty similar. Basically, they'll have this little Let's Encrypt icon in the control panel. You go in there and click that. You tell it which site you want to protect, and you'll have to have one certificate for each site that you want to do here. These are all single domain certificates. So if you've got subdomains, you'll have to go and do it for the subdomain as well. But basically, you just click that, you click install. It'll sit there and process some stuff for a bit, and it'll actually tell you what it's doing. And if you want to be scared by the technical stuff behind, just have a look at that flash past. But then it'll come up with this window, and that's it, it's done. You've now got an SSL certificate installed on your site. So everyone think they could do that? Yeah, pretty simple, isn't it? So if your host doesn't offer this at the moment, it might be time to consider moving. All right, so once we've got the certificate installed, that's the first step. We can now technically handle the communication. We have to tell WordPress that that's how we want it to work. So if you just go into your general settings, you'll see those two settings there, the WordPress URL and the home and the site address. Just put an S in them. It's that simple. Click save, And now WordPress, any traffic it gets will redirect from any HTTP incoming links to the HTTPS version. Okay? The downside, well, this is the first step. I'll talk about some other stuff later, but this means that if someone still comes to your site via HTTP, WordPress will load up, it'll try and serve that link. It'll go, oh, hang on a second, I need you to go over the HTTPS version. It'll send them over there and then it'll all go through the whole process again. So this is the first step. We also then need to update all our content. Sorry, before we get to forcing it to use SSL. So when you put content into your WordPress site, we all know about inserting links and inserting images and so forth. WordPress will save them all into the database. So throughout your pages, throughout everything, there's all these links that are still saying HTTP. And if you leave them that way, every time your site loads, it's going to try and load that, go through that process, reload that resource, and it slows everything down. So what we want to do is go through and replace all those links with HTTPS. Now, you could do it manually, but depending on the size of your site, that could take forever, and definitely not recommended. Okay? You can use a database search and replace plugin, which you basically say, go and find me all the links that say HTTP abc.com, make them all HTTPS abc.com. And it'll run away and it'll do that nicely for you. It'll take a couple of minutes and it'll all be done. Better Search Replace is one of the plugins that I've used occasionally to do that. Or if you are running something like Backup Buddy, you can do a full site backup and restore. So basically take a backup of the HTTP site, you load the backup up in Import Buddy and you run it, and you say, when you're going through that process, you say, no, my site's no longer HTTP, it is HTTPS, and it'll do all that as part of the restore for you. All right. Once you've done that, and we've got all our links sorted, then we can force our site to use SSL. And this is, as I was saying, rather than letting WordPress load up and say, oh, hang on, you're on HTTP, you need to be over there, and then going through that whole process again, this sort of intercepts before it gets to load WordPress at all, and the incoming link gets looked at the server level and it says, oh, you're a HTTP link. No, you need to be on HTTPS. Go and load WordPress just the once, and do that on the secure side. So, yeah, as I said, it stops WordPress loading twice to deliver any particular page. And it can be done either at the host level, plugins, or via some htaccess code. So again, if you're using SiteGround, let's encrypt. After you've done that, just above where you did the install, there's these couple of little buttons, turn them to on, you're good to go. If you're using iTheme Security Pro, for instance, there is a configuration within one of the dashboard icon or dashboard panels that'll do the same thing for you. And obviously there's other plugins that will do force SSL as well. And if you want to go direct, you can go and Google a bit of code and shove that in instead. And what that does is this will run before anything else on your site does. The very first thing that it looks at when someone tries to access your site, and it'll just redirect it before it gets anywhere. All right, so some of the other things you need to consider once you've done all that, you've now got a site that's running on HTTPS, but what about all the other things that were working with that site? So things like update your Google Analytics and your webmaster settings. Go and tell Google that you're now using HTTPS rather than HTTP. And the reason behind that, obviously, Google sees the two as two separate sites. So any love you had for HTTP just goes out the window unless you tell it that that is now the same site as this new HTTPS site. You don't want to have to start from scratch again. Same vein, update and regenerate your robots.txt file and your sitemap. And if you're running a plugin like Yoast, that'll do that for you. Update any inbound links you control. So these are things like your email footer, your social links, things that you have put out there, even on your business cards and things like that, if you can, just to let everyone and anyone know that you're now on HTTPS. And if you're using a CDN, Content Delivery Network, to offload some of the load from your site, you'll probably need to go and update that as well, because obviously, you know, sending stuff out there, you want to make sure it still hooks up with your site and all works. Okay, so quickly, some potential issues you can get from moving to HTTPS. First and foremost, certificate not installed properly. If that's not installed, nothing's going to work. There is a site there you can go to and test, so you just put in your domain and it'll go, yep, your certificate's all good, or no, it's not. If it is a problem, talk to your host, get it sorted. If you're using Let's Encrypt, you won't have an issue. Probably the most common one is the mixed content warnings. So even once we've gone through our database and updated all those links, there is still sometimes some HTTP content trying to be served from our site. And sometimes you'll find links embedded in your theme, like it might be looking at a particular image and it's embedded in your theme or your style sheet. So you need to update them manually. Also, third-party services like ad servers and some of the JavaScript that you import from other sites will have a HTTP link that you will need to go and either, in most cases you can make an S and it'll work. If not, you need to talk to the provider and get something sorted out there. But yeah, if the browser senses there's some HTTP content coming through on that page, it will not display the lock. It'll give a warning that it's not fully secure. Yep, so I've done them. And another one you might notice is your search engine rankings start falling. And this is the case where you haven't told Google that your HTTP site is now your HTTPS site. And it's basically treating them as two separate sites and building that new ranking up. Again, if you've done that force SSL through the redirect, it will tell Google, no, that site that was there is now this site. If you've gone into Webmaster Tools, then you can link them up that way. And the final one is you might end up with an infinite loop. Now this is a rare case, but it does happen, which is basically your HTTPS site is trying to load a HTTP resource, which is redirecting to HTTPS, which is redirecting to HTTP, and around you go again. There are some plugins that try and force a specific protocol, and some of the WooCommerce add-ons had this issue for a while. I don't deal in all of them, so I don't know if they've all been solved. But if you're getting that issue, the place to start is by disabling some of your plugins, see which one causes the problem, work out what to do from there. All right, just in the spirit of GPL, there's the image credits for the images throughout the slide. And that's it. Any questions? Get a mic down here. No, you don't. With SiteGround, it'll just auto-renew in the background. That's the benefit of using it through the host, is they'll take care of that for you.
What's the difference between a Let's Encrypt one or getting a paid one, or any different benefits or nothing?
No. As I said, in the early days, there was a difference between the certificate authorities. Some of them were much laxer than others. But these days, they're all pretty much the same. They all provide that same level of security. Again, going into some of the technical details, there's some older protocols and there's some newer protocols in terms of encryption. Google will very quickly tell you if you're using one of the others, it won't go secure. But there's I can't say there's no one using those anymore, but I'd be surprised if anyone is still selling them. Both go, both stop.
Good. If you're working on bigger sites, is there any kind of service that monitor your site? Like if you find there are any insecurities, you won't really monitor it. Like it's all good and well.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, it would be things like iframes, because anything they add internally like that and a new image in the library or whatnot, it'll automatically get HTTPS on that. But third-party external type services, Yeah, there's nothing I know of, but then I haven't looked into that specifically either. So that would be a client education piece, I think.
We have one over here too.
Yep.
We're developers who sell to clients. For me to have an SSL that covers all of my client sites, I would have to use the multi-domain one.
Yeah, if you were trying to protect multiple sites with the one certificate, and that would really only work if they're all on the one server. So if you're offering reseller hosting, for instance, that would be a way to do it. Personally, I would probably do each of the client sites as a single domain and pass that on as a pass-through cost, or use Let's Encrypt.
Because at the moment I've got the hosting URL on a server that I'm coming away from.
Mm-hmm.
So I've actually got that hosting name as my main service.
Yep.
But it's not actually on the hosting company that I'm transferring to at the moment.
Yeah, you need to have the certificate on the actual domain that's being protected. Your name servers, you can protect them if you want or not want. That's irrelevant. The certificate is tied to the domain of the site.
I've got SSL on the domain, but it's only just for that domain.
Yep.
And I've since found that it doesn't cover any of my sites underneath that.
No, it won't. As I said, most certificates that you get are tied to a single domain, unless you've specifically bought a wildcard or a multi-domain one.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah.
I guess script is okay for e-commerce sites.
Yep.
Now, I think you used to have to put a static IP as an IP address to...
Yeah, you did. In the early days, that was a requirement that you had static IP. Things have sort of moved on a bit, and I understand that that's no longer a requirement, but I also understand in a lot of cases, if you do it through your host, they'll do that for you anyway. Any more questions? Oh.
Hi. I was trying to get a certificate for a client, and I realised I think the client that I was getting, you needed to validate that they were the type of business that they were, they needed a phone call from a promoter or what have you.
Yep.
Me as a developer, if I wanted to handle all of that, is there a way I can go, hey, I'm a trusted guy, I get it other people, or?
For most certificates, that's no longer needed. Like if you're doing the extended validation one, that would definitely be required, and I don't think as a developer you can get in the middle of that. They need to validate with the company who they are. For Let's Encrypt, for most of the single domain ones, it's no longer a requirement. You basically just need to validate that you own and have access to that domain. So they'll ask you to put something on the domain that they can then check and verify that yes, you have got access. Yep. Another one up back. How are we going for time?
Just to extend not that down to the stars, I actually had a Komodo account in my name with my company with my URL with a certificate.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to buy an EDSSL for another client of mine, and they actually did the validation and they changed all of my information on my account to my client's account.
Yep.
So now that account, which has my domain, is in all my clients' information with all his ABN number and everything. So
Yeah.
be careful of that, and you don't get them to do that added to your own account.
Yeah, exactly. Be very careful with those more complicated certificates so you get the right certificate for the right domain for the right account.
And another thing I found too with getting the free one that the hosting companies supply, their self-sign still comes up as not trusted.
Yeah, it depends on the hosting company. There were a lot of the hosting companies when they started doing the I'll sell you a certificate, we're doing the self-sign. The better hosts will use a proper third-party validated certificate, or they'll use the Let's Encrypt now. Really, there's a lot more moving towards Let's Encrypt. Yeah. We done? Oh, one last one here. Can we take that?
So moving forward, if you don't have a website and you set up a brand new website, is everything now HTTPS is the Let's Encrypt? Or do you
Any new sites you set up, yeah, definitely put HTTPS on right from the start, and if you've got a good enough host that will do Let's Encrypt, it's the easiest way to do it.